Hello and welcome to the webinar. I'm George Malam, the Managing Editor of IoT Now, and today's topic is Closing the Expectation Gap, Modernization and Agentic AI for Financial Services. And there's certainly a lot to unpick in that. Customers' expectations and tolerance with how brands communicate with them has been stretched to breaking point to the extent that they distrust calls and messages and find marketing efforts intrusive and inefficient. Customers increasingly expect brands to meet them when and where they want to be met, and not by requiring a call center or other form of constrained interaction. The problem here is that if a customer won't answer a call, how can the brand possibly meet their expectations? There are also further challenges that brands face in the form of needing to enable omni-channel CX and understanding how they can assure customers that they are genuine and that communication is secure. In financial services, the pressure to do this is greater, and customers are understandably even more sensitive about their money than they are about arranging for heating maintenance or discussing a cell phone plan, for example. Financial services organizations in particular are also hampered by a legacy of aging systems, some of which have been in place for decades, and they also have needs to offer secure, often regulated services to consumers. However, they also recognize the need to enable CX flexibility in order to compete and to close that expectation gap. To achieve this, brands in general, as well as the financial services organizations, are engaging in IT modernization to drive efficiency, but also to enable flexible innovations. With big legacy expenditures making the investment in IT modernization hard to justify, it has been challenging, but projects are starting to bear fruit, taking the strain off the call center and helping to increase customer satisfaction among those who find automated CX unacceptable. The next step is to apply Agentic AI coupled with IT modernization to financial services. And I'm delighted to be joined by Lorian Carter, the I gave you promotion there, Lorian, the Senior Research Analyst at Juniper Research, and Brandon Zaylor, the Vice President of CX Strategic Accounts at CSG. Shortly, I'll hand over to Lorian to start the presentation, but first I should point out that both speakers will be staying on to take questions from the audience later on. To participate in that, simply enter your question into the panel on your screen and I will put it to Lorian or Brandon. Now, without further delay, let's get the presentation started. Lorian, the floor is yours.
Thank you, George. So I'm Lorian, a Senior Research Analyst in the FinTech and Payments team at Juniper Research, and we do forecasting, research, and provide market intelligence for FinTech, telecoms, and tech markets. Today, I want to start by highlighting some of the key challenges that financial institutions are facing, which will be outlined further in the report that comes with the webinar. One of the biggest hurdles is legacy system management. Many banks are still relying on outdated core software, which are systems that were developed over 30 years ago and are struggling to keep up with the demands of the modern banking environment. To keep on top of demand, banks have to layer solutions on top of legacy cores, creating fragmented, unintegrated systems that struggle to support the volume and complexity of the data that they are now required to process. Part of this problem is caused by customer churn, which is when customers quickly switch between banks. And this has risen drastically over the past decade, and it's continuing to rise. A survey in the UK found that 17% of adults switched bank accounts in the past year, and this rate is considerably higher in younger age groups, which suggests this problem will only intensify over time. This strains legacy systems as it requires them to perform high volumes of onboarding and offboarding processes. At the same time, banks are required to retain large amounts of historical customer data, even for customers that are no longer with them, much of which becomes wasted data as legacy systems can't use it to its full potential. We're also seeing major advancements in the sophistication of fraud attacks, which puts additional pressure on systems that just weren't designed to handle these modern threats. Legacy fraud engines weren't designed for real-time risk assessment, and they rely on batch scoring and static customer profiles to flag anomalies and assign risk scores. Siloed data also makes it difficult to build cross-channel understanding, as older platforms can't correlate signals across online banking channels and branch operations. Finally, customer expectations have risen significantly, partly driven by the growth of challenger digital banks that provide seamless digital experiences. Consumers now expect a consistent omni-channel experience across digital and physical channels. For example, if they begin to onboard online and then want to continue in person or vice versa. Delivering this is particularly difficult when systems are fragmented, as it requires the same workflow to be built in multiple channels. Together, these issues are compounding the pressure on banks, making the limitations of legacy systems more apparent than ever. Modernizing IT centers is crucial for retaining customers.
Quite a list of challenges, Lorian, and I think I'll go ahead and add right to that, because certainly what we have been seeing, all of the things that you just mentioned, the legacy systems is still such a crucial hindrance to so many banks, and this is causing yet another issue that we're going to talk about today, which is this concept of overwhelm. As consumers ourselves, I think we've certainly seen the increase and rise in the number of calls, texts, emails, all sorts of different digital messaging that just bombards us, not just from our financial services or our banks, but certainly across the board, as George was mentioning. So again, whether it's something, an appointment reminder, a prescription reminder, all sorts of different things are coming and going, and you see this overwhelm. But this really isn't just Brandon's opinion. So one of the things I'd like to point out is that the statistics I'll be using today do come from our latest State of the Customer Experience report, which we will make available to all the attendees today at the end of the report. What you'll see here, this is actually our 5th commissioned report that we've been working with our friends from Wakefield Research. You can see here on the screen, there's quite a bit of methodology that we're currently employing for this to really go and talk to those digital natives, people that are utilizing digital services in financial services, as well as other types of subscription services. And you see a nice variety of demographics, both in age, gender, location around the world, rural, city, etc. So the idea is, get what is that experience that people are seeing, feeling, and how are they best utilizing these services, which leads us to that next finding, which was, besides the overwhelm, what is the impact of that overwhelm that's being created because legacy systems don't talk to each other? This omni-channel strategy that Lorian pointed out is not universal. It's not being adopted very well, especially in banks that have multiple lines of business. These folks are actually putting business rules within the channel. You have each different business group that has their own strategy. They're competing against each other. They're competing against other brands. This overwhelm then is leading to up to 70% of consumers at this point who are agreeing with this statement, saying there's so many messages that sometimes I don't even listen to the notes that the brands are sending me. That becomes particularly challenging when we look at this next set of statistics, which is folks are truly not just tuning out, but they're actually just going ahead and clicking critical and missing critical information. So when you talk about up to 60% of your potential consumers, as George pointed out at the opening, potentially tuning out and not necessarily looking for critical messages, both Lori and I will be talking quite a bit about fraud and the impact that has in banking and the big challenge that that's providing right now. If the bank is trying to send out a critical message around a fraud notification, trying to verify a transaction, and you're getting bombarded with so many messages that you just tune out or dismiss, or worst case, delete, that's going to have a very, very negative impact to the consumer experience, but it also puts the bank at risk as well. So this digital chaos, if you will, is really very impactful. And it's something that what we advise our clients in financial services is you have to be very mindful about providing the right information in the right channel at the right time with personalization. And when you can move to being proactive from reactive, anticipate your clients' needs, understand what they're going to need, and get it to them at that right time at the right channel, you're going to see a much, much better response rate than you do when you just take that carpet bomb approach and just hit them with every channel available and then hope the message gets through. Hope is not a good strategy when it comes to messaging for your customers. With that, it's extremely critical that these banks modernize that infrastructure so that they can really take advantage of this to the best. And to talk more about that, Lori, and I'll pass it back to you.
Yeah, thank you. That's a really crucial finding. And we're also finding that customers are being overwhelmed by messages about their finances from traditional communication channels such as banks and from newer communication channels such as embedded finance apps. As customer attention becomes harder to capture, banks are starting to lose their grip on the customer experience. the threat of these embedded finance apps is accelerating the shift, moving ownership of the key interactions from banks' own channels to these embedded finance apps. Open banking is fundamentally changing the way that customers are interacting with financial services by allowing third-party providers, such as embedded finance apps, to access banking data and initiate payments through secure APIs. For example, a customer might download a budgeting app and then give it permission to access and analyze their transaction data for one of their bank accounts, which requires it to connect to the bank to receive this flow of data. Juniper Research forecasts that the number of total open banking users will reach over 645 million globally in 2029, which is a huge growth. This is a 250% growth from 183 million in 2025. So this huge change will require banks to move quickly to counteract this. The reason that this growth is so large is because open banking is currently in its infancy as a technology, but there are regulatory proposals which will change this very recently. So, for example, the UK and the EU have passed PSD2 and PSD3, which require banks to implement open banking APIs so that embedded finance apps can connect to them. And this is expected to quickly grow the rate of open banking. And this will cause a significant increase in the embedded finance market value. So last year, the embedded finance market was sized at 92 billion in 2024, and this is forecast to increase 148% to 228 billion by 2028. Embedded finance is when banking services are provided inside non-bank apps facilitated by open banking APIs, like checking out in a shopping app using Pay by Bank or viewing their balances inside a personal finance app. So this rapid expansion intensifies competition for traditional banks, as customers no longer need to enter their bank's environment. They don't need to enter the banking app. Financial institutions risk losing ownership of data and losing visibility into the full customer journey, potentially fading into the background and becoming just infrastructure providers. So to maintain this customer relationship and remain relevant, banks must compete by providing modern experiences within their own channels. So this can be by providing personalized experience to customers, like using AI to tailor financial recommendations or automate savings and split bills. However, to do this, banks must first have a unified view of customer data to create a customer profile that customer service assistants, AI, and sales associates can all access. Financial institutions hold vast amounts of data, but this is generally scattered across departments because systems are siloed from each other. To fix this, banks need to modernize their data architecture by consolidating information into shared platforms and then breaking down the barriers between legacy systems. Legacy systems are costing banks significantly. Up to 70% of their IT budget can go on maintaining legacy systems, which leaves limited room for innovation and investment into other capabilities, like creating personalized digital finance recommendations. Despite these investments, legacy banking systems are inefficient and costly to banks. So a survey of 150 banking executives in the UK found that over half of these executives reported that they still experience downtime and outages from their legacy systems despite this significant investment. And this can cause transaction failures and a high recovery IT cost to fix system failures. Data fragmentation also causes a huge opportunity cost. It leads to integration projects, reduced cross-selling potential, and banks don't have the agility they need to respond to market changes. On the other hand, modernizing IT systems can significantly reduce operational costs for banks. So, for example, implementing AI into the identity verification process allows institutions to automatically match faces on an ID document to a selfie that the person uploads. Banks can detect forged documents, and they can analyze behavior patterns to detect false identities in applications. By adopting these technologies, banks are forecast to save up to $900 million by 2028. Another area that legacy systems are costing banks is by leaving them vulnerable to fraud. And this is particularly in the face of sophisticated techniques such as synthetic fraud identity generation. This is when fraudulent actors use a mix of false and real information to act as a real customer, then they max out their credit limits and disappear. Our recent report on fraud detection and prevention in banking mapped the value of fraudulent transactions across the world. We found that $23 billion is currently being lost to fraud, which is forecast to rise to $58.3 billion by 2030, due to high-value transactions being targeted, and a rise in social media scams, and also generative AI increasing attack rates. This will place significant strain on legacy systems, prompting financial institutions to invest in updating their capabilities to tackle this. We forecast that spend on fraud detection and prevention solutions will rise 85% over the next 5 years to respond to this fraudulent threat. Some solutions that banks are expected to invest in are cross-channel fraud action. Oh, sorry, the lights just turned off. There we go. I'm still here. Cross-channel fraud platforms, behavioral biometric solutions, and also APIs that connect legacy banking cores to fraud detection solutions, and better methods of alerting customers to potential fraud. And this investment highlights that banks are recognizing the critical need for modern architecture, turning IT into a value engine. And then Brandon, I'll just pass back to you to talk a little more about that.
Oh, that sounds fantastic. So let's continue to follow and pull that string on fraudulent and how do we protect against fraud. So this is a great use case that I think I'd like to tell the story of, again, how this really impacts consumers, because it's a very real application and something that we were able to leverage very effectively for one of our customers, which happens to be the largest bank in the United States, and they're both their credit and debit card holders. So this is something that I think most folks can relate to at one point in time, which is you're at the store, you're standing in line, and you go to make a purchase, and you have that unfortunate moment where you hand your card, it gets swiped, and the cashier looks at you and says, "Hey, your card's been denied." There's that immediate thought that goes through someone's head, which is, what happened? What's wrong with my card? What's wrong with my account? Oh my goodness, this is embarrassing. There's a long line behind me. Hey, I'm in a hurry. You just get a whole wealth of thoughts that go through your head, and immediately you start to get that anger building up as well, which is, I don't have time for this. What did my bank screw up this time? So this is one of those areas where when you look at what impact this has to the bank, besides the brand impact, besides the customer experience that they're going through, you also have the fraud that they're trying to protect against. And then also, now you have that decision point while you're standing at the register. What do you do next? If the card's been declined at the point of sale, a lot of folks are going to say, run it again. If it gets declined again, their natural instinct is either going to be to try and call, but if there's a long line, they're not going to have time to do it. Or they're going to reach for the next card in their wallet, swipe again, and then the bank, the original bank, is at risk at losing that transaction. So, why are some of these things, why is this really important, and what were we able to do? So this is why the number 93 is very important. And you say, what's important about 93? Well, when we first got engaged with this bank that had a legacy system issue where they had multiple systems that weren't very well connected, it was taking 93% of their fraud cases, their transactional fraud notifications were taking 10 minutes to go out and reach a client. 10 minutes, especially in dog years, is a hell of a long time. If you're standing in line at the store trying to cash out, you're not going to you're not waiting 10 minutes to be able to actually receive a message from your bank and verify that transaction. By modernizing and putting a more modern approach into how we leverage decisioning and how we actually can unify channels so that we were able to message in channels such as text, push, email, invoice, and make all of those available, we were able to actually run through up to 150 business rules. So by the time that card is swiped, within 10 seconds, we're now able to actually resolve 93% of the cases in less than 10 seconds. 10 seconds versus 10 minutes made a huge impact for this bank. And, again, I actually had this happen myself after we had installed this and it had worked for the credit cards for the first year. We then moved that into the debit cards. And I remember one time I was at the airport in Atlanta, and I had just gone and had lunch. So I know my card had worked. I went into a kiosk for a Johnston & Murphy to buy some shoes, because when you travel all the time, sometimes you take advantage of shopping whenever you get the chance. Well, it turns out that men's shoes is one of those things that trips the algorithm for transactional fraud notifications. So as I'm standing in line, go to hand the card that I know I just worked for lunch to purchase a pair of shoes, and the clerk says, "Hey, your card's been declined." And I'm like, "There's nothing wrong with my card." And he's like, "Well, it was declined." And I'm like, "Well, wait for it." And he goes, "What do you mean?" I reached in, I grabbed my phone, I turned it towards him. And at that exact moment, all of a sudden I get a text message. And that text message said, are you trying to make this purchase for $120 for shoes? I clicked one, And I looked at him and said, "Oh, we should be good now." He goes, "Well, no, we're going to have to run the card again." I'm like, "Nah, go ahead and look." He looks down at the point of sale and goes, "Hey, you're right. The transaction went through. We're all set." He goes, "How did you do that?" And I said, "Well, we actually happen to run transactional fraud notifications for this client." He's like, "I got to get that card. That's amazing. This is so cool. I'm going to tell everybody I know about this." So it turned a embarrassing situation into a winning situation from that perspective. But really what that does is it just shows the power of being able to modernize, being able to move at machine speed, and being able to capture something again. uh, in this instance, my preferred channel, text, I was able to respond immediately. And because of that, was able to salvage that transaction. And we saw a number of wonderful consequences that came out of that. So for every 1,000 cases that were automated, that saved an FTE. It also highly reduced the number of inbound calls, and their NPS scores went out, went uh, very, very high. And then most importantly, they were able to start salvaging. And again, not allowed to share the number of dollars saved and revenue saved, but it's a very large number. But this is one of those areas where when you modernize your equipment, when you take the right type of an approach, and you have the right type of messaging in place, it can be a very powerful tool for how you leverage and communicate with your clients. So talking about a few other use cases, and especially where AI can play, Lori, and want to pass this back to you.
Yeah, thank you. That was a really illustrative example. I definitely could have done with some faster fraud notifications when I was trying to buy some concert tickets and my bank declined the transaction. I'm like, please, I only have 3 minutes to get this through. But yeah, so on to Agentic AI. Agentic AI can really speed things up, and especially in the fraud department, and target which transactions are really likely to be fraud, and then which ones are normal ones, like buying some men's shoes in the department. As banks look to modernize their operations, Agentic AI represents the next major evolution. This is because Agentic AI can learn and coordinate. It can set itself subtasks and proactively analyze data and then execute tasks until its goal is met. Implementing Agentic AI allows banks to automate multi-step workflows which typical AI systems that act on rules-based decisioning can't handle. Banks are recognizing this potential, and they're investing heavily in AI technology. Although currently generative AI is the most common use case, large banks are beginning to pivot towards more agentic use cases. So for example, Citibank announced last month that it's piloting Agentic AI for 5,000 colleagues to find out how helpful the technology can be. To move from fragmented legacy data to Agentic AI, banks must take several steps in preparation. So first, banks need to create a unified data inventory in order to optimize the way that an AI can search for and utilize data. For example, semantic knowledge graphs are a foundational abstract layer that connects fragmented data into a cohesive network, mapping the interconnected relationships between entities. And this provides the foundation for Agentic AI systems to navigate fragmented legacy data. This can help identify fraud rings, particularly with synthetic identity fraud, where fraudulent actors slightly alter personal details, so it's very difficult to detect when using legacy systems. Next, banks must invest in mapping their critical systems to identify where AI can have the highest impact. So one area that is ripe for high impact is in the fraud department. For example, DBS Bank uses Agentic AI to synthesize and classify SWIFT messages containing financial transaction instructions, and then present those actionable information to humans for approval. Once Agentic AI is implemented as an analytical layer, then actionability and workflow orchestration can occur. So for customer experience improvements, Agentic AI can intelligently route customers towards the services they're looking for and streamline onboarding processes, and also proactively resolve fraud queries. So here's an example here that Brandon is about to go through about how AI could streamline fraud queries in the future.
Great, thank you so much. So let's go back to the use case that I was talking about, and talk about how could AI actually even make that application better. Again, CSG, we didn't invent fraud notifications, we just made it better. And one of the areas that we believe that AI actually can help to play a role, if you go back and you look at how messages are sent by pretty much every bank out there, it's a pretty directed flow. So again, I'm going to send you a notification saying, hey, we've detected fraud. I'm going to ask you to say 1 for fraud, 2 for not fraud, and the system is looking for 1 or 2. Well, interestingly enough, after running this application for quite some time, we're able to consistently see that somewhere between 15 to 22% of folks actually respond with a non-standard response. I'm asking for a one, I'm asking for a two, and instead I get back, I think my wife has my card. Not a one, not a two. What's the bank going to do? Well, you get that horrible mechanical response, which is, sorry, I didn't recognize that. Is it one for fraud, two for not fraud? So one of those areas, by leveraging some agentic solutions, we believe that that non-standard response is a fantastic use case where the machine can ask and the agentic agent can start to ask questions in a more conversational fashion, try and get that person to take the moment, understand the request, and respond with something that can be recognized as, yes, we believe this is a valid transaction, or no, I'm concerned this could be fraudulent, and let's go ahead and start that fraud process. But a really, really good use case for how do you take an application that works highly effectively and make it even better, since again, a large percentage of folks still, even in a very directed situation, don't necessarily pay attention and respond appropriately. And again, we believe that utilizing a number of different conversational AIs and generative AI solutions, we can actually improve non-standard responses in banking as well as a number of applications. But I do want to throw a caution out there that says, when we go back to that state of CX report that I leveraged, or I mentioned at the very beginning, what's really interesting is that there still is a trust factor from a consumer perspective that people need to be aware of when it comes to leveraging these types of solutions. And as you'll see here, only about 41% of folks believe that an AI agent is going to be better than resolving than a human. And because of that, more than half are not as willing quite yet to allow some of these agentic AI agents just to run wild and solve any problem for them. However, our friends, our young friends that are Gen Z, they think automation's fantastic. Hey, the more the better. But most folks are taking a slightly more measured approach. And so those were some of the questions that we asked during the State of the Customer Experience report. And again, the use cases that Lorian pointed out a moment ago really shine through when you look at some of these use cases that have the highest amount of trust currently from consumers. So resolving questions, helping them find frequently asked questions, reviewing account details or summarizing accounts or different types of reports, managing appointments. These are things that people have a very high affinity towards saying, yep, feel a lot of trust, love the automation. These are great use cases. But when it comes to things such as handling payments or making changes to accounts, again, the trust factor is still one of these things that needs to be earned. And I think that's why we see not only the Citibank example that Lorian used, but certainly there was a um, article recently from Jamie Dimon at JP Morgan Chase, where they invest up to $2 billion a year, but still the bulk of what they're investing in is more inward facing for their clients and for their individual employees to get better and to make it easier for them to answer questions versus customer consumer facing yet. So again, these are those types of hurdles that are still out there. And so it comes to understanding where you are. Are you in a highly regulated field? Generative AI, where it can say anything, is not what you want out there to a consumer in a highly regulated space, such as financial services. So you have to have the right guardrails. So having the right partner that can work with you to make sure those guardrails in place. The technology works. You just have to be smart about how you employ it. And I'll end with one additional use case that we have found really makes a heck of a lot of sense. So we've actually been working with one of the largest software companies in the world that handles an extremely high volume of calls. Much like everyone else a few years ago, they were leveraging natural language understanding to answer calls and try and determine very simply, is this a sales call or a service call, and get it to the right place. However, not being able to properly understand who their customer was that was calling and understand the uh, intent of that call, they were getting up to 43% of their calls misdirected. That is an extremely high number, which led to a lot of calls that were going to the wrong place, which then leads to a lot of agent to agent times as you're trying to get the call to the right place. Again, customer dissatisfaction, very high cost of service. And we were able to work with this particular company to say, let's do a better job leveraging conversational AI. Let's take the technology as it's advancing and make sure that we can build things and not just recognize English, but recognize calls from all around the world, no matter what the language is, so that we can build one application, make it universal from the standpoint of we can build it once, recognize in almost any type of a language that's out there today, and now create a true intelligent front door or universal front door for this company so that no matter which toll-free number or local number is dialed, it comes into our application where we ask a very simple question and then determine what are they trying to do, which agent are they trying to get to, and route the call to the right place the first time. And again, 34% reduction in agent transfers. The call time has gone down tremendously. And because AI is actually, some of the new tools are very easy to build in, our go live, we were able to iterate this and deliver new workflows in 2-week sprints so that we were actually had workable demos within a 10 to 12 week period for those first call flows. So there's speed, there's much better recognition. And because of that, having things such as being able to direct calls, direct people to the right place, and now that leverages or gives us the opportunity to look for those areas where we can also leverage this technology for more self-service, things such as product activation with very large, very long, complex alphanumeric codes. Again, when you tune it correctly, even in multiple languages, it gives really, really great results for, again, intent determination, self-service, and again, creating a winning experience for our customers. So there are a lot of fantastic applications out there for agentic AI and conversational AI, et cetera. As more and more agentic AI solutions become available, more resolution agents are brought into the market. We've been making our platform even more agnostic, so it makes it easier to test multiple solutions to find the right one for your set of applications. It's not just going to be one size fits all or one winner. What you're really going to see is you're going to see a lot of evolution over the next couple of years. So being able to plug and play and win fast and lose fast is going to make the big differentiation on what's going to be a winning strategy for these financial services customers. So with that, George, I'll turn this back to you, sir.
Thank you very much. That was a great presentation and conversation between both of you, and with plenty of data as well. Really enjoyed that. We've had some questions in. I should point out there's probably going to be time to take more, so do enter your questions into the panel on screen, and I'll put it to either Brandon or Lorian, maybe both of them, who knows. Right, first question that we've had is, how can financial institutions balance modernization with regulatory compliance? And I'll put that to Lorian, please.
Yeah, I think I can answer that one. I personally don't see it as a trade-off. I think modernization is key to maintaining regulatory compliance. We're seeing banks get fined at record high levels for breaching anti-money laundering regulations and know your customer regulations. And a huge reason for that is that they can't process all of this data manually. There's long lags between receiving a potentially fraudulent transaction and then analyzing that, and either approving the account or denying it. So I think modernization is really key to comply with all these regulations. One example I can think of is that TD Bank got fined, I think, 3 billion in a money laundering case last year. And it was found that they were failing to monitor over 90% of their transactions on their network, which is most of them. So having an AI system in place to just monitor all of these and make sure there's some kind of safety net is really key at the moment.
Great, thank you. Next question I've got is probably one for Brandon. It's, what's the biggest risk of delaying agentic AI adoption? And I guess that would be interesting to follow up on some of the things you were just saying about approaching agentic AI cautiously. So what about the flip side of the coin, being the risk of delay? What's your view on that, Brandon?
Oh gosh, what's the term people like to use? FOMO, right? Fear of missing out.
Yeah.
Let's face it. Almost every project that's being budgeted right now, if it's got AI tagged to it, you're seeing things get green lighted to move forward. It's the latest new toy. It's the shiny object that's out there, and it has a lot of promise. And I think people see that promise both for, again, improving internal processes, as well as, again, these external use cases that Lorian had pointed out earlier. So, I think the biggest risk is are you going to ride the wave? Are you going to take the opportunity to make those improvements that can positively impact your consumers? And are you going to take those risks to, again, modernize your infrastructure, streamline your processes, and cut cost out of your business? And if you're not going to do that, you're going to fall very, very deeply behind very, very quickly because of the promise of that this brings to move faster. So again, I'm just going to say FOMO for the answer, my friend.
Okay, sounds good. A four-letter answer is unusual in a webinar, but that's very appropriate in this case. Great. Moving on, another question for you, Brandon. How should banks measure the success of AI in CX, and what cultural changes are needed to support adoption?
Yeah, another fantastic question, because so many business cases are built off of the return on investment is a cost savings, and you get these soft measurements such as improvements to CX. And how do you do that? So when you start these projects, it's extremely important, and certainly it's the approach that CSG takes and my team takes, which is sitting down with the customer, baselining current performance, understanding those key performance indicators that you're going to measure, make sure that they are, first of all, are they measurable? Second of all, how are you going to measure those improvements? Again, what are they doing today? What types of improvements are they going to see? And then building the reporting and the dashboarding to make sure that that's an integral part of the project, not an afterthought. Because we see so many folks that are just rushing to try and put something in place to get a cost savings, but then they don't get budget the next time because they can't prove the cost savings, or they can't prove the improvements that were actually made into the project. So putting that at the very beginning and making that part of the culture, which is uh, uh, understanding that and having the right governance, the right buy-in by key stakeholders, coming to those agreements on what you're going to measure, how you're going to measure it, and then actively doing so is equally important throughout all of these projects.
Got it. Thanks. Moving on, got a question for Lorian. How will modernization elevate CX and deliver measurable operational efficiency?
Oh, thank you. Yeah, that's interesting. That's targeting the two key areas. You've got the subjective kind of elevation of customer experience, and then you've got the measurable operational efficiency. So for elevating customer experience, modernization is really key in order to keep up with digital challenger banks and keeping up with the threat of embedded finance. So without modernization, you can't really tailor customer interactions. You can't go in their banking app and then offer them insights on their budget, insights on their spending. And then just looking at the other end, for operational efficiency, banks are sinking a lot of money into maintaining legacy systems. So I read recently that UK banks are set to spend 3.3 billion next year just on maintaining legacy systems, which is such a vast number. And by modernizing this, banks can reduce the system failures that legacy systems are prone to. They reduce the recovery costs from IT for recovering from the system failures. And that's not even touching on ripple effects of having all the customer data in one place to develop cross-selling strategies. So yeah, I think that's modernization can elevate both customer experience and then also operational efficiency.
Okay, great, thank you. Next question that we've got, I'll put this one to Brandon. How can banks reduce customer overwhelm to improve the clarity and impact of digital communications?
Excellent question. So one of the things, and I think I might have alluded to this one a little earlier, it truly is taking a look at what is your current strategy for reaching your customers. And again, are you perpetuating your own problem by, again, taking this, what I like to call the carpet bomb approach? More is not always better. So again, if you think hitting them in every channel that you can, every channel where you have consent, just keeping in mind that if you're doing that and you're also, from a governance perspective, not talking about creating message prioritization across other groups within the same enterprise, you really need to understand if your customer has just called in and let's say they're having some type of an issue or a complaint, is that really the right time to send them an upsell, cross-sell type of an application or type of message until you resolve the issue that's at hand? Taking a look at those types of things. So, I mean, that's just one that just seems to apparently make sense. But certainly one of the things that we've looked at is that if you can do a better job of understanding, are you gaining the action when you're sending that message out? So it goes back to having intelligent decisioning, adding in real-time context to make sure you're recognizing what is your customer doing. So if you've sent them a message and you're asking for them to do some type of a response, did they do it? Measure that before you send out the next message. But so many folks, I mean, how many times do you make a payment and then the next day or 2 days later, you're getting a message from your bank saying, hey, your payment's due? It's like, I already made the payment. But if you would have looked, instead of just having a rigid schedule that says, I'm going to send you a text message, I'm going to make a phone call, and I'm going to send you an email, I don't get something that makes it look like they're disconnected and don't know me and don't understand what I'm doing. So adding real-time context as well as real-time consent checks is a really big part of a strategy that can be used to say, let's make sure that we have the business rules unified in one layer and that each channel just takes off of that. And before any message gets sent, let's do a quick check to say, have they actually resolved and have they actually done what I've asked them to do prior to sending that message out? It seems so simple, but when you have one team that's responsible for email and a different team responsible maybe for digital messaging, and yet a third, which is part of the call center, and they don't talk to each other, you get in very, very quickly into overwhelm. And that's one of those areas where we can really help to unify that. And again, the ultimate goal is to say, hey, if it's a payment reminder that you're looking for, again, how do you start getting more proactive and make it even more seamless for someone to do that? So get proactive versus reactive. So again, multiple strategies. That's one we're happy to talk about all day, every day.
Great, thank you. Question has come in. I guess it goes to that perhaps the generational divides that that you were talking about in the presentation. The question is, how do we ensure that agentic AI is taking the right decision for a given situation, and what do you think will make people trust the app's decision, as it were? To either of you, how do you feel that trust will be built, perhaps in the age demographics that are more distrusting of AI or less understanding of its potential?
Lauren, you want to go first?
Yeah, I'm happy to take that. So yeah, in terms of generational divide, I think we're seeing huge uptake for AI in the younger generation, particularly Gen Z. I think in terms of making people trust the app's decision, it's not so much of making people trust it and sort of forcing them into an experience they don't want. But as Brandon was saying, we have to target the use cases that people are most comfortable with first. Then once we build trust in those use cases, then we can go on to implementing agentic AI into more situations. But of course, consumer choice is very important, and the ability to choose whether they want agentic AI to intervene in the situation is important as well. I think people will always be able to contact humans in situations if they do want to.
Yeah, the only thing I'll add to that is it has to work. Again, putting applications in just to put applications in, putting in agentic just to put in agentic, if it doesn't really help to solve the problem, it's not going to build that long-term consumer trust. So again, I think having use case selection is extremely important. Having things that the agentic agent can actually solve for effectively is extremely important. Those are the types of things that will help to build trust. Again, I mentioned the use case around being able to direct calls and recognize intent. That's a great one. I mean, you can tell right away if you're talking to an inbound voice response unit and it doesn't recognize what you're saying, that level of frustration can build pretty quickly. So right away whether you have something that's trusted because it's working or it's not trusted because it's not. And then building off of those successes.
Okay, next question I've got in is, I thought it was kind of an obvious answer, and even the questioner has suggested it. It says, if agentic AI takes a wrong decision, then who is accountable? The bank, ? And yeah, on the surface, yeah, it would be the bank, but perhaps there's an element here that if it's being asked to perform the wrong task or given the wrong data to perform that task, or the expectation level of the customer is in fact wrong, the decision about accountability is kind of more multi-layered than just saying, yeah, it's the bank's fault. Their agentic AI app didn't do what it was supposed to do. And that goes back to some of the things we talked about earlier about exercising caution and perhaps not trying to boil the ocean and do everything, but to find use cases where things can be tightly controlled and real value can be delivered. But from your point of view, Brandon, who is ultimately accountable if agentic AI takes the wrong decision?
I think Lorian pointed this out earlier. Ultimately, it's the bank from the standpoint of in a highly regulated space. The regulators are going to say it's the bank. So ultimately, that's where the fines are going to come in, and that's where the buck stops. Now, I love your example though. If I'm asking my bank, hey, what's my balance through a chatbot? Okay, I would expect them to be able to answer that. But if I'm asking them what the weather is in Bermuda, that's probably a little on me. It's not quite the right expectation to think that a banking chatbot's going to answer that question. There's better places to go get that. But yeah, the reality is it really does come down in those highly regulated spaces. There's no room for error. There are very specific reasons why those long disclaimers have to be read, and it's to make sure that that the banks are properly covered. And that's why, again, the generative responses are going to be a little bit longer in coming, I think, before that really gets more and more exposed to the consumer, just because of that liability.
Yeah, it's the guardrails, isn't it? In bowling, keep the guardrails up. Don't let the ball leave the alley, and then you won't get into the wrong side of regulation, I guess. Did you have anything to add to that, Lorian, or were you happy with Brandon's response?
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, I think that agentic AI is going to take a while before it's implemented fully and it's customer facing. I think early on, a lot of it's going to be in back office operations, and we're going to see a long pilot stage. Banks have only just started piloting it, and I think this is going to carry on for quite a while before it's fully deployed.
Yeah. So it's a kind of blend of fear of missing out and safety first, and that's probably a good point to end on. Thanks very much to our today's speakers, Brandon Sailors from CSG and Lorian Carter from Juniper Research. I'd also like to thank the audience for attending today and for the great questions that they sent in. We look forward to welcoming you to another webinar soon. Thanks again, and goodbye from me.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, thank you.